Iowa farmlands, 2022. Autumn leaves scatter across freshly tilled soil as Rebecca Hayes pushes her weathered tractor across the eastern field. The engine sputters, protesting the uneven ground where recent heavy rains have carved unexpected depressions. In the earth, at 35, with calloused hands and determination etched into the fine lines around her eyes, she surveys the struggling farm that's been in her family for generations, and the mysterious depression that appeared overnight in the far corner of her property. Somewhere beneath those collapsed layers of soil lies an answer to a question she hasn't yet thought to ask. Hope and uncertainty battle within her as the tractor grinds to a halt at the edge of the sinkhole. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What awaits Rebecca isn't just a simple repair job for her struggling farm, but a discovery that will unleash decades-old secrets, draw military officials to her quiet, rural property, and connect her to the legacy of a man who once prepared for the unthinkable. In the hidden depths beneath ordinary farmland, she'll discover that inheritance comes in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest opportunities emerge from the ground we thought we knew. The tractor's engine died with a final, reluctant sputter as Rebecca Hayes climbed down to examine the strange depression more closely. Recent torrential rains had transformed parts of her 120-acre farm into a patchwork of waterlogged fields and newly formed gullies, but this was different, too symmetrical, too sudden. The earth had simply collapsed inward, creating a perfectly circular void, approximately 15 feet in diameter. "Damn it," she muttered, calculating yet another expense she couldn't afford. At 35, with dark hair perpetually pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes the shade of spring cornfields, Rebecca possessed a resilience forged through years of agricultural challenges and personal hardships. The farm's financial situation had grown increasingly precarious since her husband's death 3 years earlier, leaving her to raise their 10-year-old daughter Emily while fighting to keep the generations-old Hayes farm operational. She knelt at the edge of the depression, feeling the soil crumble beneath her fingers. The unusually heavy October rains had saturated the ground, revealing something that had been hidden beneath the surface for who knows how long. Rebecca peered into the darkness below, but could discern little beyond an unnatural void where solid earth should be. "Mom!" Emily's voice carried across the field as her daughter pedaled her bicycle along the tractor path. "Grandma says dinner's ready." Rebecca straightened, brushing soil from her jeans. "Coming!" she called back, making a mental note to set up warning markers around the sinkhole. The last thing she needed was for Emily to stumble across it during one of her farm explorations. That evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table with her mother, Margaret, reviewing the farm's precarious finances. Margaret had moved in following James's death, providing both emotional support and practical help with Emily, while Rebecca struggled to keep the farm afloat. "We could sell the east field," Margaret suggested gently, knowing how Rebecca would react, but feeling obligated to present all options. "Cropper Development has made offers to everyone in the county." Rebecca shook her head firmly. "Dad always said that Eastfield had the best soil on the property. I'm not selling an inch of this farm, Mum. We just need one good season." Margaret's expression revealed her skepticism, but she didn't argue. They'd had this conversation too many times already. Instead, she asked, What about that sinkhole you mentioned? Could it damage the irrigation system? I'll check it out properly tomorrow, Rebecca replied, closing the ledger book with finality. Probably just old field tile collapsing. Nothing we haven't handled before. But as she lay in bed that night, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that the perfectly circular depression wasn't like the other weather-related damage they'd experienced over the years. There was something deliberate about its shape, something that nagged at her farmer's intuition, a sense developed through years of reading the land as clearly as others read books. Morning arrived with the first frost of the season, painting the fields in crystalline white that would melt with the rising sun. Rebecca dressed in layers, thermal shirt, flannel and her father's old canvas work jacket, and headed out before dawn. She wanted to properly investigate the sinkhole before tackling the day's more pressing chores. Armed with a powerful flashlight and a coil of rope, she approached the depression cautiously. Overnight, more soil had eroded inward, revealing what appeared to be a metal edge beneath the earth. Rebecca's pulse quickened. This was no collapsed field tile or natural sinkhole. Something manufactured lay beneath her field, something substantial enough to have remained hidden for years, perhaps decades. Carefully, she brushed away loose soil from the exposed metal edge, revealing what appeared to be a heavy-duty hinge. Rebecca sat back on her heels, momentarily stunned. Could this be an old storm shelter? Her grandfather had mentioned something about previous owners building underground storage during the farming crisis of the 1980s, but this seemed more substantial than a makeshift root cellar. Using a small garden trowel, she began clearing more soil, exposing what was undeniably a large metal hatch. The more she uncovered, the more confused she became. This was no farm storage. The metal was thick, industrial grade, with faded stenciling that had once been official lettering of some kind. After an hour of careful excavation, Rebecca had exposed enough to see a faded government identification code and what looked suspiciously like a military warning symbol. "What on earth?" she whispered, tracing the barely visible lettering with her fingertips. Her phone rang, startling her. It was her neighbor, Dale Wilson, checking if she needed help with fence repairs after the recent storms. Dale was in his 70s, a Vietnam veteran who had farmed the adjacent property for decades and had been her father's closest friend. "Actually, Dale," she said after explaining the morning's discovery, "I think I could use your opinion on something." 30 minutes later, Dale's weathered pickup truck bounced down the field access road. Despite his age, he moved with the careful precision of a man who had spent a lifetime working with his hands. His expression, typically friendly beneath his ever-present seed cap, turned serious as he examined Rebecca's discovery. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, kneeling despite arthritic knees to get a better look at the exposed hatch. "Rebecca, I think you found yourself a Cold War bunker." "A what?" she asked, though she'd heard him perfectly. "Back in the 50s and 60s, government built these things all over the country. Some were official installations, others were private, and commissioned by folks with government connections who were scared of nuclear war." He pointed to the faded markings. "These are military-grade materials. No ordinary farmer had access to this kind of hardware." Rebecca stared at the hatch with new understanding. "But this farm has been in my family since the 1950s. My grandfather bought it from the Kellers in 1958. Wouldn't he have known about this?" Dale shook his head. "Not necessarily. These things were often built covertly, classified, and your grandfather didn't move onto the property immediately, remember? rented it out for several years while he finished his service. This was true. Rebecca's grandfather had purchased the farm as an investment while still serving in the military, only moving his family there in the mid-1960s after his retirement. There could have been plenty happening on the property in those intervening years that went undocumented in family records. "So what do we do now?" Rebecca asked, torn between curiosity about what lay beneath the hatch and concern about what its presence might mean for her farm. Dale studied the exposed portion thoughtfully. "Well, first thing is to see if we can open it, then decide whether this is something the authorities need to know about." He paused, then added, "Government doesn't just forget about installations like this, Rebecca. If this is what I think it is, somebody somewhere has it on a list." Together, they cleared more soil from around the hatch, revealing a sophisticated locking mechanism. Dale examined it with the expertise of someone who had encountered military hardware before. "Think you can open it?" Rebecca asked. "Maybe," Dale replied, "though I'm not sure we should without knowing what's inside. These places were built to withstand nuclear war. Could have all sorts of systems still active, air scrubbers, water filtration, maybe even power supplies with backup generators." The implications slowly dawned on Rebecca. This wasn't just an interesting historical artifact. It was potentially a complex facility beneath her struggling farm. As a practical farmer, her mind immediately went to the questions of liability, safety, and impact on her property value. "Let me make a call," Dale said finally. "I know a guy who served with me in Nam who went on to work in military installation security. He might have some advice before we go prying into something that could be government property." While Dale returned to his truck to make the call, Rebecca sat on the ground beside the exposed hatch, thoughts racing. If this was indeed a government installation, what did that mean for her ownership of the land? Could they force her to sell? Would they restrict her farming operations? After fighting so hard to keep this farm, would some decades-old military secret be what finally took it from her family? Dale returned, looking troubled. "My buddy says we should document everything before trying to open it. Take photos, record the exact coordinates. Says if it's what we think, there might be official channels to report it." "Report it?" Rebecca felt a surge of protectiveness. "This is my land, Dale. I didn't ask for some secret bunker to be hiding. Under my cornfield." Dale's expression softened with understanding. "I know, Rebecca, but these things were built during tense times. Cold War wasn't a game. These facilities were part of national security infrastructure, might still be classified. Even after all these years." Rebecca stood, dusting soil from her jeans with frustrated motions. "So what? They can just build something under my farm without my knowledge and then claim rights to it decades later." "Government operates by its own rules," Dale said simply. "Let's just document everything carefully, try to open it if we can do so safely, and then decide next steps based on what we find." They spent the next hour photographing the hatch and clearing enough soil to fully expose the entry mechanism. Dale examined it with increasing interest, pointing out features that confirmed his suspicions about its military origins. "Look here," he said, indicating a series of numbers stamped into the metal. "That's a Department of Defense asset tracking code. This wasn't some paranoid millionaire's private shelter. This was official." Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October morning. "So what's it doing under my farm?" "That," Dale said with the hint of a grim smile, "is the million-dollar question. By mid-morning, they had cleared enough debris to attempt opening the hatch. The mechanism was sophisticated but showed signs of age, decades of being buried. It had caused some corrosion, though the seal appeared impressively intact. Dale worked methodically, applying lubricant from his truck to the hinges and locking mechanism. "Moment of truth," he said finally, positioning himself to pull on the heavy metal handle they'd uncovered. "Stand back a bit. No telling what kind of air might come out of there after all this time." Rebecca stepped back, camera phone ready to document whatever they might find. Dale braced himself, then pulled with the steady strength that had served him through decades of farm work. For a moment nothing happened. Then, with a sound like a vacuum seal breaking, the hatch shifted slightly. "Got it," Dale grunted, adjusting his grip. "Heavy son of a gun." With considerable effort, he raised the hatch, revealing a dark vertical shaft with metal rungs embedded in the concrete wall. A rush of stale, cool air emerged from the opening. Rebecca aimed her flashlight into the darkness, illuminating what appeared to be a sturdy ladder descending approximately 15 feet to a concrete floor below. "Jesus," Dale whispered, peering down. "It's intact, completely intact," Rebecca directed, her light around what was visible of the space below. The beam caught glimpses of metal shelving, what looked like electrical equipment, and walls lined with some kind of specialized material. "What do you think it was for?" she asked, her voice hushed despite herself. Dale shook his head slowly. "Communications, maybe, or monitoring. These weren't living quarters, more like operational facilities. During the height of the Cold War, they built networks of these places. Early warning systems, secure communications nodes, fallback positions. The implications sent Rebecca's mind racing. If this facility had been part of some larger network, it might have historical significance beyond just being an unusual discovery. But more pressingly, it represented an unknown factor in her already complicated efforts to maintain her family's farm. "I need to see what's down there," she decided. Dale looked uncertain. "Rebecca, maybe we should wait for someone with expertise. In these facilities could be structural issues, contaminants, who knows what." But Rebecca had already made up her mind. This was her land, her farm, her responsibility. Whatever secrets lay beneath the soil of the Hayes family farm, she needed to understand them before making any decisions about involving outside authorities. "I'm going down," she said firmly, securing her flashlight. "Just keep watch up here, and I'll give you a shout if I find anything concerning." Dale recognized the determined set of her jaw, the same expression her father had worn when his mind was made up. "All right," he conceded, "but be careful. Don't touch any switches or controls. Just look around and come back up." These places weren't built for amateurs to explore. Rebecca nodded, then carefully lowered herself onto the metal ladder. The rungs were cold, but surprisingly solid beneath her weight. As she descended into the darkness, the beam of her flashlight revealed more details of the underground structure, and what she saw took her breath away. This was no simple bunker or storage facility. The space opened into a substantial room, approximately 30 feet square, with multiple doorways leading to additional areas. The walls were lined with what appeared to be sound-dampening materials, and the infrastructure suggested serious purpose. Telecommunications equipment, monitoring stations, and what looked disturbingly like weapons storage racks, now empty. "Dale!" she called up, her voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. "You need to see this. It's some kind of command center." Dale's descent was slower. his movements careful as he navigated the metal rungs with joints stiffened by age and hard work. When he finally stood beside Rebecca in the main chamber, his expression transformed from caution to awe. The beam of his flashlight joined hers, illuminating the sophisticated facility that had remained hidden beneath ordinary farmland for decades. "This is military grade," he murmured, moving toward what appeared to be a central control station. Cold War era, but top of the line for its time. His fingers hovered over dust-covered switches without touching them. Nuclear-hardened, self-contained power system, probably has independent air and water purification. Rebecca circled the room slowly, her flashlight revealing row after row of equipment racks, most still containing what appeared to be communications. Technology. A large map of the Midwest dominated one wall, with locations marked in faded red pins. In one corner stood a metal desk with a locked filing cabinet beside it. "What was this place for?" she asked, her voice hushed despite the emptiness. Dale shook his head, examining the layout with increasing recognition. "Command and control would be my guess. Part of the nuclear defense network. See these communication arrays. They were designed to maintain government operations even after a first strike." He pointed to heavy shielding around critical components. This wasn't just a shelter, it was an operational facility. Rebecca struggled to reconcile the ordinary farmland above with this hidden military installation below. How could something like this exist without anyone knowing? "My family has worked this land for 3 generations. Compartmentalization, Dale said simply. Need-to-know basis. During the Cold War, these facilities were scattered across the country, often in rural areas, away from primary targets. Most were known only to a handful of military personnel assigned to maintain them. He moved to what appeared to be a generator system in an adjacent room. "Look at this. Diesel backup with massive fuel storage capacity. This place was designed to operate autonomously for months, maybe years." As they explored further, Rebecca discovered 3 additional rooms branching off the main chamber. The first appeared to be a modest barracks with 4 bunks. The second contained comprehensive medical supplies, most still sealed in their original packaging, along with military rations long past their expiration dates. The third room, secured by a heavier door with an advanced locking mechanism, proved impossible to access. "What do you think is in there?" Rebecca asked, examining the substantial lock. Dale frowned. Given the security, could be weapons cache, classified communications equipment, or document storage. These facilities were often equipped to restore government functions if primary command centers were destroyed. Rebecca tried to absorb the magnitude of their discovery. "So I've been growing soybeans on top of a secret government doomsday bunker for years." "Looks that way," Dale confirmed. "And judging by the dust patterns and maintenance logs I found by the generator, it was actively maintained until at least 1989, right around when the Cold War was ending." They continued exploring, careful not to disturb anything that might still be operational. In the main chamber, Rebecca discovered a logbook in a desk drawer, its pages filled with entries documenting regular maintenance checks, supply inventories, and cryptic status reports. The final entry was dated November 12, 1989, 3 days after the fall of the Berlin Wall. "Final decommissioning procedures initiated," she read aloud. "Awaiting official protocol for site abandonment. Maintain. Surveillance schedule until further notice." She looked up at Dale. "Then nothing, like they just walked away." Dale nodded grimly. Soviet Union was collapsing. Priorities shifted overnight. Wouldn't be the first time the government abandoned operations without proper closure. Happens more often than you'd think, especially with black budget projects. As Rebecca flipped through the logbook, a folded document slipped from between its pages, official letterhead with Department of Defense clearly visible at the top. She unfolded it carefully, finding a property easement agreement dated 1958, the same year her grandfather had purchased the farm. "Dale," she said, her voice tight with growing understanding. "Look at this. My grandfather signed this." She held up the document, yellowed with age but still legible. "It's an agreement granting the government access rights to a portion of the property for national security infrastructure development and maintenance." Dale examined the document. "Subsurface easement agreement," he confirmed. "Your grandfather knew something was here, Rebecca. He just might not have known exactly what." He pointed to language in the agreement. "See this confidentiality clause? He was legally prohibited from discussing it. Probably came with the farm when he bought it, and he had no choice but to sign if he wanted the property." Rebecca felt a complex surge of emotions. Surprise that her grandfather had kept this secret, anger at the government's presumption, and a strange sense of connection to a history she hadn't known existed beneath her feet. But most pressing were the practical implications. "So what does this mean for me now?" she asked. "Does the government still have rights to this facility? Can they just show up and claim part of my farm if they decide they need it again?" Dale studied the document more carefully. Easement has a duration clause. Looks like it was established for the duration of the national security emergency as determined by the Department of Defense, not to exceed 50 years without renegotiation. He calculated quickly. That would have expired around 2008, unless they renewed it. Did you ever receive any communication about this? Rebecca shook her head firmly. Nothing. No government representatives, no renewal notices, no indication whatsoever that there was a Cold War command center under my soybeans. Then legally, this facility might be abandoned property at this point, Dale suggested, though the government has been known to assert claims when it suits them, regardless of technicalities. He handed the document back to Rebecca. "You should get this to a lawyer who specializes in property rights, preferably one with experience dealing with government claims." As they continued their exploration, Rebecca's practical nature began to assess the potential value of their discovery. The bunker was structurally sound, the equipment potentially historical, and the mere existence of such a facility on her property might have implications she hadn't yet considered. What would something like this be worth, she wondered aloud. Not that I'm looking to profit from national security infrastructure, but depends who's asking, Dale replied. Military historians would have a field day. Cold War museums might pay for some of the equipment. Property developers might see potential for an unusual conversion. He paused, then added more seriously, and the government might want to ensure nothing sensitive remains, possibly at any cost. Rebecca checked her watch and was shocked to discover they'd been underground for nearly 3 hours. "I need to get back. Emily will be home from school soon, and I don't want her wondering where I've disappeared to." They climbed back to the surface, carefully securing the hatch before replacing some of the soil around its edges, enough to protect it from casual discovery, but leaving it accessible for further exploration. The ordinary autumn day seemed surreal after hours in the underground facility, sunlight and open sky, a stark contrast to the concrete and steel bunker below. What now? Rebecca asked as they walked back toward the farmhouse. Dale considered the question carefully. Document everything. Photograph the easement agreement and logbook. Research who might have jurisdiction over abandoned military installations. But be careful who you tell, Rebecca. Until you understand the legal implications, this information could attract attention you don't want. At the farmhouse, Rebecca's mother met them with concerned questions about their extended absence. After some hesitation, Rebecca decided to share their discovery, knowing she could trust Margaret's discretion. "A military bunker?" Margaret repeated, visibly shocked. "Under our east field? That's impossible." She sat heavily at the kitchen table. "Your father never mentioned anything like that." "Maybe Grandpa never told him," Rebecca suggested. "The agreement has a confidentiality clause. He might have been legally bound not to discuss it. Or he simply didn't know the details," Dale added. "These agreements often used vague language intentionally. He might have understood there was some kind of government access rights without knowing exactly what was down there." Margaret shook, her head still processing. "What does this mean for the farm, for you and Emily?" "I don't know yet," Rebecca admitted, "but I intend to find out." That evening, after Emily was asleep, Rebecca spread the documents from the bunker across the kitchen table. The property easement, the maintenance logs, and several technical manuals they'd recovered provided pieces of a puzzle she was determined to solve. She photographed each document carefully, creating digital backup copies before researching property attorneys who might understand the unique situation. Her search led her to Catherine Weiss, an attorney in Des Moines who specialized in unusual property disputes and had previously handled cases involving government claims. Rebecca composed a careful email explaining her situation without revealing too many specifics, requesting a consultation. As she worked, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that the bunker represented both opportunity and threat. On one hand, the facility was a fascinating historical discovery with potential value. On the other, it could bring unwanted government attention to her struggling farm at a time when financial vulnerability made her position precarious. The following morning, Rebecca received an enthusiastic response from Attorney Weiss, who offered to drive out to the farm the next day to discuss the situation in person. Her email mentioned experience with unusual government property interests and suggested that time might be of the essence. Rebecca called Dale to update him and asked if he would be present for the attorney's visit. "I value your insights," she explained, "especially since you understand the military aspects better than I do." "Of course," Dale agreed. "And Rebecca?" "I've been thinking. Before your attorney gets involved, we should thoroughly document the facility's current state. Take video of everything, catalog any equipment or documents, establish clear evidence of what was there when you found it." The suggestion triggered a ripple of concern. "You think items might go missing once others get involved?" "Let's just say I've dealt with government operations before," Dale replied cryptically. "Documentation protects everyone's interests." That afternoon, they returned to the bunker with proper lighting equipment, a video camera, and supplies for a more thorough investigation. Rebecca was struck again by how surreal it felt to descend from her ordinary fields into this hidden Cold War relic. Working methodically, they recorded every aspect of the facility: the equipment racks, communication systems, power supply, and living quarters. Dale provided commentary based on his military experience, identifying components and explaining their likely functions. This was state-of-the-art in its day, he noted, examining a sophisticated radio system, designed to maintain communications even after electromagnetic pulse effects from nuclear detonations. In the barracks area, Rebecca discovered personal items that humanized the facility. A forgotten playing card deck, a paperback novel with a 1985 publication date, and a coffee mug with a faded Air Force logo. She found herself wondering about the men and women who had staffed this secret installation, maintaining their silent vigil beneath ordinary farmland. The locked room remained a mystery, its heavy door resisting their efforts to gain entry. "We could force it," Dale suggested, "but might be better to wait for professional assistance. Could be nothing important, could be something we shouldn't disturb without proper authorization." As they completed their documentation, Rebecca noticed something they'd missed during their initial exploration. A small safe built into the wall of the main command center, partially hidden behind equipment racks. Unlike the advanced locking mechanism on the mysterious third room, this safe featured a more conventional combination dial. "Worth trying some standard military combinations," Dale suggested. "They often used predictable sequences for lower security storage." After several attempts with birthdays of famous generals and significant military dates, the safe remained firmly locked. "We'll need a professional for this too," Rebecca concluded, making a final note in her documentation. They emerged from the bunker in late afternoon, Rebecca's mind racing with questions about what their next steps should be. The farm chores she'd neglected demanded attention, a reminder that regardless of what lay beneath her fields, the daily responsibilities of agriculture continued without pause. As she parted ways with Dale, promising to call after meeting with the attorney, Rebecca caught sight of Emily returning from a friend's house on her bicycle. For a moment, she considered the weight of the secret she now carried, not just for herself, but potentially for her daughter's future as well. That evening, Rebecca researched Cold War history, trying to understand the context that had led to a military command bunker being built beneath her family's farm. The more she learned about the elaborate civil defense networks constructed during that era, the more she realized that her discovery might have historical significance beyond its impact on her property rights. She found references to the continuity of government program, which had established hundreds of secret facilities designed to maintain government functions in the event of nuclear war. Many remained classified even decades later, with their locations and capabilities still treated as sensitive information. A knock at the door startled her from her research. Through the window, she saw Dale's truck in the driveway, though she hadn't expected him until tomorrow's meeting with the attorney. When she opened the door, his expression immediately set her on edge. "What's wrong?" she asked, stepping aside to let him in. Dale glanced over his shoulder before speaking, his voice low despite the empty driveway. "My military contact called. Back, the one I reached out to yesterday about proper procedures." He removed his cap, twisting it in his hands, a gesture Rebecca had never seen from him before. "Rebecca, I think we may have stumbled onto something more significant than we realized." He asked very specific questions about the facility's designation codes, the ones stamped on that main control panel. "And?" Rebecca prompted, tension building in her chest. When I told him, there was a long silence. Then he said he needed to make some calls. Dale met her eyes directly. "An hour ago, he called back and strongly suggested I secure the site, and expect contact from official channels within 24 hours. Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn evening. What does that mean exactly? It means, Dale said gravely, that whatever that bunker was used for, someone still cares about it, and they're coming to your farm. Rebecca's kitchen fell silent as Dale's words hung in the air, the magnitude of their implications settling like a physical weight between them. The wall clock ticked steadily, a mundane counterpoint to the extraordinary situation unfolding around. Her family farm. Define official channels, Rebecca finally said, her voice steadier than she felt. Are we talking local authorities? Military? Some shadowy government agency that's going to show up in black SUVs? Dale shook his head, uncertainty clear in his weathered features. My contact wouldn't specify, just said the facility designation triggered protocols that are apparently still active. He leaned against the kitchen counter, suddenly looking every one of his 73 years. I'm sorry, Rebecca. I thought we were dealing with abandoned Cold War infrastructure, not something that would bring immediate attention. Rebecca paced the worn linoleum floor, mind racing. We need to get ahead of this. Whatever's coming, I want legal representation present when it arrives. She checked her watch, nearly 9 p.m. I'm calling Attorney Weiss tonight, not waiting. Until tomorrow? She reached for her phone, but Dale gently caught her wrist. Before you make that call, we need to discuss something. His expression had shifted to one Rebecca recognized from community meetings. The look he got when delivering difficult truths no one wanted to hear. There's a possibility that whoever comes tomorrow might attempt to classify our discovery. Once that happens, your legal options could become significantly more limited. They can't just declare my farm a classified site, Rebecca protested. This is private property. I have rights. Normally, yes, Dale agreed. But national security creates exceptions to normal property law. The fact that your grandfather signed that easement complicates things further. It established a legal precedent for government access that could be revived under certain circumstances. Rebecca sank into a kitchen chair, the full weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders. Her farm, the legacy she had fought so hard to preserve after James's death, the future she was building for Emily, now faced a threat she'd never anticipated. What do you suggest? She asked finally. Document everything, again, but this time create multiple copies, digital and physical, store them in different locations. Dale's voice took on the precise tone of someone who had dealt with government agencies before. Consider sending encrypted files to your attorney before any officials arrive. And, he hesitated, you might want to think about what you're willing to negotiate. Negotiate, Rebecca repeated, an edge entering her voice. This farm isn't negotiable, Dale. It's all I have. I understand, he said gently. But if this facility was what I suspect, a critical communications node in the continuity of government network, they might assert national security interests that override typical property rights. Being prepared to negotiate from a position of strength could be your best protection. Rebecca made the call to Catherine Weiss, who answered despite the late hour. The attorney listened intently to the abbreviated version of events, asking pointed questions about the easement document and Dale's military contact. I'll be there first thing tomorrow, Weiss promised. In the meantime, follow your neighbor's advice about documentation. Send me everything you've collected so far, especially that easement agreement and Ms. Hayes. Don't sign anything or make any statements to officials before I arrive." After ending the call, Rebecca turned to Dale. "She's coming at 7 a.m. Can you be here? Wouldn't miss it," he assured her, settling his cap back on his head. "Try to get some rest, Rebecca. Tomorrow might be a long day." Rest, however, proved elusive. After Dale left, Rebecca uploaded all their documentation to a secure cloud storage account, made physical copies of the easement agreement, and wrote detailed notes about everything they'd discovered. Around midnight, she finally fell into a troubled sleep at the kitchen table, only to be awakened by the sound of her mother's footsteps on the stairs. "Rebecca," Margaret appeared in the doorway, tying her robe. "It's nearly 2 a.m. What are you doing?" Rebecca explained the situation, watching her mother's expression shift from concern to alarm. "They can't take the farm," Margaret insisted when she'd finished. "Your father worked himself to the bone to keep this place going." "Your grandfather before him?" "I know, Mom," Rebecca said, rubbing her tired eyes, "and I have no intention of letting them take it, but we need to be prepared for whatever happens tomorrow." They spent the next hour reviewing their options, Margaret, providing insights about the farm's history that might prove relevant. "Your grandfather was always very private about his military service," she recalled. "Your father once mentioned that Grandpa Edwin had worked in communications during the Korean War, but he never discussed details. Could be why the government approached him about placing something on his property, existing security clearance, perhaps." The connection hadn't occurred to Rebecca. "You think Grandpa knew exactly what was down there?" Margaret considered the question. "I can't say for certain, but Edwin Hayes was a meticulous man who understood contracts. If he signed that easement, he likely knew more than the document explicitly stated." Dawn brought a clear autumn sky, the sun rising over fields, touched with frost. Rebecca had just finished making a pot of strong coffee when she heard tires on the gravel driveway. Attorney Catherine Weiss had arrived, a tall, angular woman in her 50s, with short silver hair and a no-nonsense manner that immediately inspired confidence. "Show me everything," she requested after brief introductions, setting her briefcase on the kitchen table. Starting with that easement agreement, Rebecca laid out the documents while explaining their discovery in greater detail. Weiss listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound portfolio. "The subsurface easement is problematic," she acknowledged after examining it, "but not insurmountable. The expiration clause works in our favor, and there's no evidence of renewal attempts." She tapped a particular paragraph. "This compensation clause is interesting. Your grandfather was supposed to receive annual payments for the inconvenience. Did your family ever receive these?" "Not that I'm aware of," Rebecca replied. "My father never mentioned any government payments related to the property." Weiss made another note. "That could work in our favor. Failure to maintain compensation terms can invalidate continuing claims." She glanced up as Dale's truck pulled into the driveway. "Is this your neighbor?" The kitchen soon filled with the scent of coffee and tension as Rebecca, Margaret, Dale, and Attorney Weiss discussed strategy. Weiss was direct about the challenges they might face. "Government claims involving national security operate under different rules," she explained. "They might attempt to classify the entire matter, which complicates legal opposition. Our best approach is to acknowledge their historical interest while asserting your current property rights and negotiating favorable terms from the outset." "What kind of terms?" Rebecca asked, cradling her coffee mug. "Financial compensation, certainly." but also specific limitations on any access rights, guarantees about agricultural disruption, and explicit protection of your ownership interests. Weiss leaned forward. The goal is to establish that while you're willing to accommodate reasonable national security concerns, this remains your property with your rights paramount. The sound of vehicles approaching interrupted their planning session. Through the kitchen window, Rebecca watched a procession unlike anything she'd seen before, turning into her driveway. 2 black SUVs followed by a larger vehicle that resembled a mobile command center, all unmarked, but unmistakably official. "Showtime," Weiss murmured, gathering her documents. "Remember, let me do most of the talking. When you do speak, be factual but limited. Don't volunteer information they haven't specifically requested." The visitors emerged from their vehicles. With military precision, 4 men and 1 woman, all in civilian clothing, but carrying themselves with unmistakable military bearing. The apparent leader, a granite-faced man in his 50s with close-cropped silver hair, approached the porch first. "Ms. Rebecca Hayes?" he inquired as Rebecca opened the door. "I'm Colonel James Harrington, United States Army Corps of Engineers. Special Projects Division. We need to discuss a matter of national security regarding your property." Rebecca held the door without immediately inviting them in. "This is my attorney, Catherine Weiss, and my neighbor Dale Wilson, who's been assisting me with a recent discovery on my farm." Harrington's eyes narrowed slightly at the mention of an attorney, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "May we come in? The matters we need to discuss are not for open air." Once seated around the kitchen table, now crowded with the addition of Harrington and 2 of his colleagues, the atmosphere grew even more tense. The colonel placed a leather portfolio before him, but didn't immediately open it. "Ms. Hayes, we understand you've discovered a subsurface government installation on your property," he began. "I need to inform you that this facility remains classified, despite its inactive status. Any information you've gathered about it falls under national security restrictions." Weiss intervened smoothly. "Colonel, before we proceed, I should clarify that my client discovered this facility entirely by accident, following significant erosion from recent storms. She has acted in good faith throughout, documenting her discovery as any responsible property owner would. She placed the easement agreement on the table. We're also aware of this historical agreement, which appears to have expired approximately 15 years ago without renewal attempts." Harrington examined the document with a slight frown before returning his attention to Rebecca. The facility in question was part of a communications network established during the Cold War. While it was decommissioned in 1989, certain aspects of its construction and technology remain sensitive. We're here to secure the site and assess any potential complications. "By complications, do you mean my ownership of the farm where your bunker happens to be located?" Rebecca asked, ignoring Weiss's warning glance. "Because that's not a complication, Colonel. It's a fact. This farm has been in my family for generations, and I intend to keep it that way." The woman who had accompanied Harrington spoke for the first time. "Ms. Hayes, I'm Dr. Elaine Farber, Historical Preservation Specialist with the Department of Defense. We have no intention of challenging your ownership of the surface property. Our concern is strictly with the subsurface installation, which represents significant historical and potentially operational value." "Operational?" Dale repeated, leaning forward. "That facility has been abandoned for over 30 years. Harrington and Farber exchanged a glance that Rebecca couldn't quite interpret. It was the colonel who responded, his words carefully measured. The communications equipment, while outdated, represents a particular type of hardened technology that remains relevant to certain contingency planning scenarios. Additionally, there may be sensitive documentation or materials that were not properly removed during decommissioning, such as whatever's in the locked room we couldn't access. Rebecca suggested, watching their reactions. Another glance between the officials confirmed her suspicion. They were very interested in that locked room. "Ms. Hayes," Harrington continued, "the government is prepared to compensate you for access, rights to secure and potentially remove sensitive materials from the installation. We can draft a new, temporary easement that respects your property interests while allowing us to fulfill our security obligations." Weiss had been making notes throughout this exchange. "My client would certainly consider a reasonable arrangement, Colonel. However, after 3 decades of government neglect regarding this installation, followed by its unexpected discovery, we would need specific assurances." She outlined several requirements: time limitations, minimal disruption to farming operations, substantial compensation, and complete transparency about any continuing government interest in the property. The negotiations continued for nearly 2 hours, with technical specialists occasionally being called in from the mobile command center to address specific questions. Throughout, Rebecca observed the subtle dynamics between the officials, noting how certain topics, particularly the locked room and something they referred to as the sentinel components, seemed to elevate tension levels. By mid-morning, they had reached the framework of an agreement. The government would gain secured access to the bunker for 60 days to remove classified equipment and documents. Rebecca would receive substantial compensation for this access, along with guarantees that her agricultural operations would remain unaffected. Most importantly, the agreement explicitly acknowledged that the original easement had expired and no continuing government claim to the property existed beyond the temporary arrangement. "There's one additional matter," Harrington said, as the documents were being prepared. "The nature of this facility and its contents remain classified. We'll need non-disclosure agreements from everyone who has knowledge of the discovery." "Absolutely not," Weiss countered immediately. "My client will agree not to publicize specific technical details about the installation, but a blanket non-disclosure agreement is excessive and potentially restricts her legal rights." Another round of negotiations ensued, eventually resulting in a limited confidentiality agreement that protected specific technical aspects of the facility while allowing Rebecca to acknowledge its existence and general purpose. As the officials prepared to leave, Dr. Farber approached Rebecca privately. "Your grandfather was involved in communications security during his military service," she said quietly. "It's probably why this location was selected. He would have understood the importance of what was built here." The comment confirmed Margaret's earlier speculation, adding another layer to Rebecca's understanding of her family's connection to the hidden facility. "Did he know exactly what was down there?" Rebecca asked. Farber smiled slightly. Security compartmentalization was standard procedure, but given his background, he likely knew more than most property owners would have. She hesitated, then added, "The work done in facilities like these helped prevent nuclear war, Ms. Hayes. Your family's land played a small but significant role in maintaining the peace during very dangerous times." After the officials departed to begin securing the bunker entrance, Rebecca, Dale, Margaret, and attorney Weiss regrouped in the kitchen. The morning's intense negotiations had left them all drained, but cautiously satisfied with the outcome. They were very interested in that locked room, Dale observed, and whatever these sentinel components are. Cold War communication systems often had code names, Weiss explained. Sentinel might refer to specialized equipment or a particular operational protocol. The important thing is that we've established clear boundaries for their activities and secured appropriate compensation. Rebecca stared out the window toward the east field, where government personnel were already establishing a secure perimeter around the bunker entrance. What happens after their 60 days are up? Do we just seal it back up and pretend it never existed? Weiss considered the question. That's entirely your decision. Once they've removed the classified materials, the physical structure becomes a unique feature of your property. Some owners might see it as a liability, others as an opportunity. Opportunity, Margaret echoed skeptically. Historic preservation, educational purposes, even creative repurposing, Weiss suggested. Cold War history has growing appeal. A well-preserved government bunker could have value beyond its original purpose. The possibility hadn't occurred to Rebecca, who had been focused solely on protecting her ownership rights. The bunker represented an unexpected connection to history, not just national history, but her own family's previously unknown role in it. "I'd need to check on Emily," she said, suddenly remembering her daughter would be returning from school soon. She still doesn't know about any of this. As Rebecca headed upstairs, Dale followed her to the front door. "You handled that remarkably well," he said. "Standing your ground against government officials isn't easy, especially when they start throwing around national security concerns." Rebecca smiled tiredly. "I've faced down bank loan officers threatening foreclosure. After that, even military colonels seem manageable." Her expression grew more serious. "Thank you, Dale, for your expertise, your support, all of it." "That's what neighbors do," he replied simply, "though I admit most neighboring emergencies involve borrowed equipment or strayed livestock, not classified Cold War bunkers." His attempt at humor broke some of the tension that had built throughout the morning. Rebecca found herself laughing for the first time since they'd discovered the metal hatch in her field. The sound seemed to release something that had been tightly wound inside her, a reminder that despite extraordinary circumstances, life continued. "I'll check back this evening," Dale promised. "See how our government friends are progressing with their secret retrieval operation." After he left, Rebecca sat on the porch steps, watching the distant figures working around the bunker entrance. The autumn sun warmed her face as she contemplated the remarkable turn her life had taken. Just days ago, her biggest concern had been making the next mortgage payment and hoping for cooperative weather for the harvest. Now she was negotiating with military officials over Cold War technology buried beneath her soybeans. The irony wasn't lost on her. That the government facility her grandfather had secretly allowed on their property might now provide the financial relief needed to secure the farm's future. The compensation outlined in their agreement would eliminate her immediate debt concerns and provide breathing room to address the farm's long-term viability. But beyond practical considerations, Rebecca found herself drawn to the historical significance of their discovery. Her family had unknowingly played a role in the elaborate defense network that had helped maintain an uneasy peace during one of history's most volatile periods. There was something profound in that connection, a legacy more complex and far-reaching than simply working the land. As she watched Emily's school bus approach in the distance, Rebecca considered how to explain the sudden government presence on their property to her curious 10-year-old. The truth, she decided, or at least a version of it appropriate for young ears. This hidden history belonged to Emily, too, another layer in her family's connection to this land they called home. The bus stopped at the end of the driveway, and Emily bounded out, her backpack bouncing as she ran toward the house. Her excited voice carried across the yard as she spotted the unusual vehicles near the east field. "Mom, what's happening? Are they making a movie on our farm?" Rebecca stood, brushing dust from her jeans as she prepared to introduce her daughter to an unexpected chapter in their family history, one that had lain hidden beneath their feet for generations, waiting to be discovered. Rebecca met Emily halfway up the driveway, gathering her daughter in a tight hug before leading her toward the house, away from the government activities in the east field. Emily's questions tumbled out in rapid succession, her natural curiosity amplified by the unusual vehicles and uniformed personnel visible in the distance. "Are those soldiers? Why are they digging in our field? Is it buried treasure? Ancient dinosaurs?" Her eyes widened with each new possibility her imagination conjured. "Not dinosaurs," Rebecca assured her with a smile, guiding Emily onto the porch. "But it is something hidden underground, something pretty amazing, actually." She sat on the porch swing, patting the space beside her. "Remember how we talked about your great-grandfather Edwin serving in the military before he bought this farm?" Emily nodded, settling next to her mother. "He was in Korea. You showed me his medals in the attic trunk." "That's right. Well, it turns out great-grandpa Edwin did something very important during a time called the Cold War." Rebecca searched for words that would make sense to a 10-year-old. Back then, America and another country called the Soviet Union were in a kind of standoff. Both sides had very dangerous weapons, and everyone was afraid there might be a big war. "Like with bombs?" Emily asked, her expression solemn. "Yes, honey. To help prevent that war, the government built special communication stations all across the country. Secret ones, hidden where nobody would think to look for them." Rebecca gestured toward their fields. "Including right here, underneath our farm." Emily's eyes grew impossibly wider. "We have a secret government base under our soybeans?" "A small one," Rebecca clarified. "It's been abandoned for a long time, since before you were born. We discovered it yesterday when that sinkhole appeared in the east field. Those people are from the government, making sure everything down there is safe and secure." It was a simplified explanation, but sufficient for now. Emily would have plenty of questions in the coming days, and Rebecca could provide more details as appropriate. For the moment, her daughter seemed to be processing this revelation with the adaptability unique to children. "Can I see it? The secret base?" Emily asked predictably. "Not right now," Rebecca said firmly. "The structure is very old, and they need to make sure it's stable first. But I promise that once the experts say it's safe, we'll find a way for you to see it." This compromise seemed to satisfy Emily, who immediately launched into speculations about what a secret base might contain, her imagination running towards sci-fi technology and spy equipment rather than the mundane reality of Cold War communications. Gear. Inside the house, Margaret had prepared an early dinner, anticipating that the day's events would disrupt their normal routine. As they ate, Rebecca filled Emily in on selected highlights of their discovery, carefully omitting the tenser moments of negotiation and anything that might cause unnecessary worry. "So they're paying us money to look at our secret bunker?" Emily, us between bites of meatloaf. "Something like that," Rebecca confirmed. "They need to remove some special equipment that belongs to them, and they're compensating us for access to our property." Emily considered this with the pragmatism she'd inherited from her mother. Will it be enough to fix the tractor and maybe get new basketball shoes for school? Rebecca exchanged a glance with Margaret, both women fighting smiles at Emily's priorities. "Yes to both," she assured her daughter. "The tractor, basketball shoes, and quite a bit more." After dinner, while Emily tackled her homework, Rebecca stepped onto the back porch for a moment of solitude. The autumn evening was settling over the farm, golden light fading to purple dusk as bats began their nightly insect hunt above the fields. In the distance, lights now illuminated the government operation around the bunker entrance, creating an incongruous glow amid the rural darkness. Her momentary peace was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Dale's truck appeared, followed by another vehicle Rebecca didn't recognize, a civilian sedan with rental car plates. She watched curiously as Dale emerged from his truck accompanied by an older man who moved with the deliberate care of someone conserving energy. "Rebecca," Dale called as they approached the porch. "Hope you don't mind an unannounced visit. This is Robert Kendrick. He served with me in Vietnam, then spent 30 years with the Defense Intelligence Agency, the contact I mentioned earlier." Kendrick stepped forward, extending a weathered hand. Despite his apparent age, Rebecca guessed late 70s, his grip was firm and his gaze sharp beneath bushy white eyebrows. "Ms. Hayes, I apologize for arriving without invitation, but after speaking with Dale about your discovery, I felt compelled to see it firsthand." "You drove all the way from Washington?" Rebecca asked, noting his East Coast accent. "From Columbus, actually. I was there visiting grandchildren when Dale called." Kendrick glanced toward the illuminated activity in the East Field. "I see our friends from the Corps of Engineers Special Projects Division have already arrived." The way he said the division, name suggested skepticism. "You know them?" Rebecca asked. "I know of them," Kendrick clarified. "They handle recovery and containment of sensitive Cold War infrastructure, among other things. Usually competent, occasionally overzealous." He turned back to Rebecca. "Ms. Hayes, I believe I might provide some context about your discovery that could prove valuable, particularly regarding any negotiations with the government representatives." Rebecca studied him for a moment, assessing his motives. Dale's presence, who vouched for Kendrick's character, but she'd learned to be cautious with unsolicited assistance. "What kind of context?" "The kind that official briefings tend to omit," Kendrick replied with a hint of a smile, "particularly regarding facilities designated with the prefix code you described to Dale." Her curiosity outweighed her caution. Rebecca invited them inside, where Margaret had just finished helping Emily with her math homework. After introductions, and Emily's reluctant departure for bed, despite her protests about missing more secret bunker talk, the adults gathered in the living room. "I should clarify that I'm not here in any official capacity," Kendrick began, accepting the coffee Margaret offered. "I retired from government service 12 years ago. However, during my career, I had extensive involvement with the program that established facilities like the one on your property." "The continuity of government network?" Rebecca asked, recalling her research. Kendrick looked mildly impressed. "Yes, though that's a broad umbrella term. The facility beneath your farm was part of a more specific initiative called Project Sentinel, a distributed communications framework designed to maintain command capabilities even after a first-strike nuclear scenario. Dale leaned forward. They mentioned Sentinel components during the negotiations this morning, seemed particularly concerned about them. Understandably so. Kendrick nodded. The Sentinel system incorporated technology that was revolutionary. For its time, specialized transmission equipment designed to function despite electromagnetic pulse effects and radiation. What made it unique was its distributed architecture. Rather than centralizing critical communications, Sentinel created redundant nodes across the country, each capable of operating independently while maintaining the command network. Rebecca tried to process the implications. So our farm bunker was one node in this network, Node 12, based on the designation Dale described, Kendrick confirmed. What makes it particularly significant is its location. This region was strategically important due to its relative distance from primary Soviet targets while maintaining accessible connections to multiple government contingency facilities. If this technology was so important, why abandon it? Margaret asked. Why not update it instead of just walking away? Kendrick's expression turned reflective. Politics, primarily. When the Cold War ended, defense priorities shifted dramatically. Maintaining distributed systems like Sentinel was expensive, and newer satellite-based technologies promised similar capabilities at lower operational costs. Budget constraints forced difficult choices. A hint of bitterness crept into his voice. Some of us argued for preserving key infrastructure, but prevailing wisdom favored consolidation and modernization. Dale studied his old friend with newfound understanding. You were involved in Sentinel directly, weren't you, Bob? I helped design portions of the transmission security protocols, Kendrick acknowledged, and I opposed the decommissioning process on technical grounds. But decisions were made at levels above my pay grade. He turned to Rebecca, which brings me to why I'm here. The government representatives who visited you today almost certainly downplayed the historical and technical significance of your discovery. They seemed pretty interested in that locked room, Rebecca noted, and adamant about removing whatever Sentinel components remain. The locked room likely contains the core transmission equipment, the most sensitive and advanced elements of the system, Kendrick explained. What they didn't tell you is that some aspects of Sentinel technology remain classified because they've never been fully replicated, even with modern advancements. This revelation shifted Rebecca's understanding of her negotiating position. So they're not just concerned about historical security breaches, they actually want the technology itself. Precisely. Kendrick sipped his coffee. Modern communication systems are remarkably vulnerable to certain types of disruption. Sentinel was designed specifically for resilience under worst-case scenarios. That approach has renewed relevance in an era of cyber warfare and digital vulnerability. Dale exchanged a glance with Rebecca. Sounds like the government's interest might extend beyond the 60-day recovery period they negotiated. Almost certainly, Kendrick agreed. They'll remove the classified components as agreed, but your property's strategic location remains valuable. Once they've secured the sensitive technology, they might approach you about reactivating or repurposing the facility. Rebecca processed this information, mentally recalibrating her approach to the situation. Why are you telling me this, Mr. Kendrick? You spent your career in intelligence work. Doesn't sharing these insights conflict with your professional background? Kendrick set his cup down carefully, his expression turning serious. I believe in government service, Ms. Hayes. I dedicated my life to it. But I also believe in fairness and transparency when dealing with American citizens. He gestured toward the window, beyond which the government operation continued in the darkness. Those officials are following protocols established for national security reasons, but they're not obligated to ensure you fully understand the value of what's beneath your land. And you think I should? What? Hold out for more money? Rebecca asked, trying to understand his motivation. I think you should make fully informed decisions about your property and its relationship to national security infrastructure, Kendrick clarified. The compensation they've offered is likely fair for simple access and recovery. But if they approach you about re-establishing operational capabilities, that's an entirely different consideration with different value propositions. The conversation continued late into the evening, with Kendrick providing insights about Cold War infrastructure that contextualized Rebecca's discovery within a broader historical framework. He explained how facilities like the one beneath her farm had formed a complex network designed to preserve governmental continuity during nuclear crisis, a physical manifestation of the tension that had defined global politics for decades. Your grandfather's involvement was likely more significant than even he realized, Kendrick noted. These locations weren't chosen randomly. The government preferred properties owned by veterans with security clearances and demonstrated loyalty. The fact that Edwin Hayes was selected suggests he was held in high regard by military intelligence. This perspective added another dimension to Rebecca's family history, a legacy of service that extended beyond Edwin's official military record. Her grandfather hadn't just farmed this land. He had granted access to a portion of it for national security purposes during a time of genuine existential threat. As the evening grew late, Dale suggested that Kendrick stay at his house rather than driving to a hotel. The older man accepted gratefully, his energy visibly flagging after the long day. "One last thing before I go," Kendrick said as he rose to leave. "Those officials will likely attempt to access the locked room tomorrow. If possible, I'd recommend being present when they do. What's inside might provide leverage in any future negotiations." After their visitors departed, Rebecca and her mother sat in the quiet kitchen, processing the day's revelations. "Do you trust him?" Margaret asked finally. "This Kendrick person?" Rebecca considered the question carefully. "I trust Dale's judgment, and Kendrick didn't try to disrupt the agreement we already negotiated. He just provided context for potential future discussions." She stared into her cooling coffee. "Besides, his insights align with what we've observed about the government's particular interest in the Sentinel components. It's strange to think of Dad's farm being part of some secret Cold War network," Margaret mused. "All those years we worked this land, never knowing what was beneath our feet." "I keep thinking about Grandpa Edwin," Rebecca admitted. "Signing that easement, keeping that secret all those years. I wonder how he felt about it, whether he saw it as a burden or an extension of his military service." Margaret smiled sadly. "Your grandfather was a quiet man, but he had strong convictions about duty. If he believed that Bunker served an important purpose. He would have considered it an honor to host it, not a burden. The following morning dawned clear and cold, frost silvering the fields as Rebecca completed early chores before Emily woke for school. She found herself viewing the familiar landscape with new awareness, conscious now of the hidden dimensions beneath the soil she'd farmed for years. By the time Emily had departed for school on the yellow bus, government vehicles were already arriving at the east field. Rebecca watched from the kitchen window as personnel in specialized protective gear prepared to enter the bunker. Something about their equipment suggested today's operation would be more technical than yesterday's initial assessment. Her phone rang, Dale calling to check in. "Kendrick and I are heading over. Looks like they're preparing for the main extraction today." He paused. "Rebecca, Bob suggested you might want to document whatever they remove, especially from that locked room. Could be important for understanding exactly what the government values about your property." Rebecca had already considered this. "I'm planning to observe. Attorney Weiss is coming back midday as well. The agreement gives me the right to monitor their activities as property owner." She dressed quickly and walked out to the perimeter they'd established around the bunker entrance. Colonel Harrington stood consulting with several technicians, all wearing subtle insignia that identified them as military specialists rather than regular Corps of Engineers personnel. "Ms. Hayes," he acknowledged her approach with professional courtesy. "We're preparing to access the secure storage area today. Dr. Farber wanted to speak with you before we proceed." Elaine Farber emerged from one of the vehicles, carrying what appeared to be historical documents in a protective case. "Good morning, Ms. Hayes. I thought you might appreciate seeing these." She opened the case to reveal original architectural plans for the bunker, dated 1958. These show the facility as it was designed, including the secure room your neighbor mentioned. Rebecca studied the detailed blueprints with fascination. The bunker was more extensive than their initial exploration had revealed, with additional chambers accessible only through the locked room they hadn't been able to enter. The secure area contains specialized transmission equipment, Farber explained, confirming Kendrick's assessment. "Revolutionary technology for its time. We'll be carefully removing it for historical preservation and security purposes." "Historical preservation?" Rebecca echoed, recalling Kendrick's comments about the continuing relevance of Sentinel technology. Farber smiled diplomatically. "These systems represent an important chapter in Cold War defense technology. The Smithsonian has an entire program dedicated to preserving such artifacts, though some components remain classified and will be secured in military archives." As they spoke, Dale's truck arrived, Kendrick accompanying him. Harrington's expression tightened noticeably at the sight of the retired intelligence officer, confirmation that Kendrick's reputation preceded him. "Robert Kendrick," Harrington said as the two men approached. "Didn't expect to see you involved in this recovery operation." "Just offering neighborly support, Colonel," Kendrick replied mildly. "Ms. Hayes and I were discussing the historical context of Project Sentinel last evening. Fascinating program, particularly its distributed resilience aspects." The subtle tension between the men was palpable, suggesting professional history or disagreements Rebecca wasn't privy to. Harrington quickly redirected attention to the operation at hand, explaining that specialized technicians would open the secure room while taking precautions against potential environmental hazards. "Cold War facilities sometimes utilize materials we now know to be problematic," he explained. Asbestos, PCBs, occasionally low-level radioactive components in certain sensing equipment. Standard protocol requires protective measures during initial access. The explanation was reasonable, but Rebecca noticed Kendrick's slight headshake, a silent indication that the precautions likely served security purposes as much as safety ones. Whatever lay in that locked room, the government remained very interested in controlling access to it. As the technical team prepared to descend into the bunker, Rebecca found herself standing between representatives of different generations of government service, Harrington's current military authority and Kendrick's historical knowledge. Both offered perspectives on the significance of what lay beneath her farm, yet neither provided the complete picture. What remained clear amidst the complexity was that her family's simple farmland had unexpectedly connected her to something larger, a hidden chapter of American history and the continuing evolution of national security priorities in a changing world. The technical team descended into the bunker with methodical precision, carrying specialized equipment in hardened cases. Rebecca, Dale, and Kendrick remained near the entrance, observing from the permitted distance while Colonel Harrington coordinated operations via radio. The morning air held the crisp clarity unique to autumn in Iowa, contrasting sharply with the tense atmosphere surrounding the government operation. They're bringing more equipment than would be necessary for simple documentation and removal, Kendrick observed quietly, noting another team unloading what appeared to be advanced scanning technology from one of the vehicles. The protective gear suggests they're expecting to find active systems, not just abandoned hardware. Rebecca considered this assessment against Harrington's safety explanation. Active after 30 years underground, is that possible? Sentinel. Nodes were designed with independent power systems, specialized batteries utilizing materials with extremely long half-lives, supplemented by small radioisotope thermoelectric generators. Kendrick's expression remained neutral, but his tone conveyed professional appreciation. Theoretically, certain baseline functions could remain operational for decades without maintenance, particularly the security and monitoring subsystems. Dale whistled softly. No wonder they're treating this like a live site rather than a historical relic. Their conversation halted as Dr. Farber approached, her professional demeanor slightly strained by what appeared to be excitement. The team has reached the secured area and is preparing to access it. Colonel Harrington thought you might want to observe the process via our monitoring system, Ms. Hayes. As property owner, you have that right under our agreement. The invitation surprised Rebecca, who had expected more resistance to her involvement. She glanced at Kendrick, whose subtle nod encouraged acceptance of the unexpected access. "I'd appreciate that," she replied, following Farber to the mobile command center vehicle. Inside, multiple screens displayed live feeds from cameras carried by the technical team. The central monitor showed the locked door they had discovered during their initial exploration, now surrounded by sophisticated equipment designed to bypass its security systems without damaging the contents beyond. The locking mechanism is a Hamilton Class 3 security system, explained a technician monitoring the operation. State-of-the-art for 1958, utilizing mechanical and early electronic countermeasures. We're circumventing rather than forcing it to preserve the historical integrity of the installation. Rebecca watched, fascinated, as the team methodically defeated security measures designed to protect whatever lay beyond. Their expertise suggested considerable experience with Cold War facilities. This clearly wasn't their first recovery operation of this nature. After nearly 30 minutes of precise work, the heavy door finally yielded with a pneumatic hiss that was audible even through the camera's audio system. The team paused, scanning the newly accessible space for potential hazards before proceeding. "Atmosphere reads normal," reported the lead technician. "No radiation beyond background levels. Temperature stable at 54 degrees Fahrenheit. With clearance established, the camera advanced into the secured room, revealing what appeared to be an advanced communications center far more sophisticated than the equipment in the main bunker area. Rack-mounted systems lined the walls, their designs clearly military but unlike any technology Rebecca recognized. At the center stood a console with multiple workstations, above which a large display panel remained dark after decades without power. "Sentinel core systems intact?" The technician's voice conveyed professional excitement despite his measured tone. "Primary transmission array appears undamaged. Backup data storage modules present and sealed." Colonel Harrington, who had joined them in the command center, allowed himself a satisfied nod. "Excellent. Proceed with documentation protocol before disconnection." Rebecca studied the screens with growing appreciation for what they were witnessing. Even to her untrained eye, the technology appeared remarkably advanced for its era. Sleek designs that somehow anticipated modern aesthetics despite their mid-century origin. "It looks more modern than I expected," she commented. "Almost like something from a science fiction film of that period." Dr. Farber smiled with genuine enthusiasm. "Much of what we consider retro-futuristic design was actually pioneered in classified military projects. Commercial technology often lagged a decade or more behind what was being developed for defense applications." She gestured toward a particularly elegant console. That communication array incorporated principles that wouldn't appear in civilian systems until the 1980s. As the team continued their careful documentation, Rebecca became aware of subtle tensions in the command center. Certain components drew extended attention from the technicians, with hushed consultations occurring off-camera. Harrington's expression gradually shifted from professional satisfaction to something more complex, surprise tinged with concern. "Is something wrong?" Rebecca asked, noting the change in atmosphere. "Not wrong," Harrington replied carefully. "Unexpected. Some of the Sentinel subsystems appear to have remained in standby mode rather than full deactivation. The system was designed to maintain certain monitoring functions indefinitely, but we hadn't anticipated finding active capabilities after so many years." Kendrick, who had quietly entered the command center behind them, spoke up. "The contingency protocols would have maintained core functions through the backup power systems. That was a fundamental design principle of the Sentinel network: persistent operational readiness, regardless of external circumstances." Harrington's expression tightened at Kendrick's input, but he didn't challenge the assessment. "Mr. Kendrick is correct. We're finding evidence that the system has been passively monitoring and recording according to its baseline protocols, despite the decommissioning orders issued in 1989. The implications slowly dawned on Rebecca. "Are you saying this thing has been active under my farm all this time? Recording what exactly?" Dr. Farber intervened with practiced diplomacy. "The Sentinel system was designed to monitor emergency broadcast frequencies and certain types of atmospheric anomalies associated with nuclear events. It wouldn't have been gathering personal data or surveillance information. She glanced at Harrington before adding, "However, its continued operation does raise interesting questions about the thoroughness of the decommissioning process, or about intentional preservation of capacity," Kendrick suggested, his tone neutral, but implications clear. The tension between historical transparency and current security concerns was palpable as the recovery operation continued. Rebecca watched the methodical work with growing awareness that the significance of her discovery extended beyond what any of the parties had initially acknowledged, including the government representatives now working to extract the technology. By midday, Attorney Weiss had arrived, joining Rebecca in the command center to observe the ongoing process. She watched the technical procedures with careful attention, occasionally making notes about specific components being removed and the methods used to document them. "They're being surprisingly transparent about the operation," she commented quietly to Rebecca, "more so than I would have expected based on initial national security concerns. Maybe because they know I have witnesses who already understand what we're seeing," Rebecca replied, nodding subtly toward Kendrick, who was engaged in technical conversation with one of the senior specialists. "Hard to maintain excessive secrecy when your former designer is standing right there," Weiss smiled slightly. "Leverage works in mysterious ways. Their awareness of Kendrick's involvement likely encourages best practices rather than shortcuts." The recovery operation continued throughout the afternoon, with teams carefully disconnecting and packaging the sophisticated equipment for transport. Each component was meticulously documented, photographed, and secured in specialized containers that would protect the decades-old technology during transit to government facilities. As the work progressed, Rebecca stepped outside for fresh air, finding Dale sitting on the tailgate of his truck, watching the activity from a respectful distance. "Quite the operation," he commented as she approached. "Never thought I'd see something like this on Hayes. A farmland?" Rebecca leaned against the truck beside him, grateful for his steady presence throughout the unfolding situation. "It's surreal. Yesterday I was worried about paying the mortgage. Today I'm watching the government extract Cold War technology from beneath my soybeans while a retired intelligence officer provides commentary." Dale chuckled. "Life takes unexpected turns. Your grandfather would probably be amazed to see how his old agreement turned out." He glanced toward the bunker entrance. "Speaking of which, Bob mentioned something interesting while you were in the command center. The designation codes on the facility suggest it wasn't just a standard communications node. It had some kind of special status in the network." "What? A kind of special status?" He wasn't entirely sure, or wasn't saying everything he knows, Dale replied. But he indicated the numeric sequence identified it as what they called a continuity node, designed to remain operational longer than standard facilities and potentially serve as a regional coordination point if primary command structures were compromised. This new information added another layer to Rebecca's understanding of what lay beneath her property. So, not just any bunker, but a particularly important one. That might explain the interest in recovering everything intact, rather than simply removing classified components. Their conversation paused as Emily's school bus appeared on the main road, turning toward the farm driveway. Rebecca checked her. "Watch school day already over?" The hours having passed more quickly than she'd realized while focused on the recovery operation. "I should meet her," Rebecca said, pushing off from the truck. "She'll have 1,000 questions about all this activity." Dale nodded. Bob and I will stick around if you need us. He's particularly interested in seeing what else they bring out of that secured room. Emily bounded from the bus with characteristic energy, her curiosity about the government operation immediately evident as she peppered Rebecca with questions during their walk back to the house. Are they finding cool spy stuff? Laser guns? Secret? Codes? Her imagination clearly surpassed the reality of dusty communications equipment being carefully extracted from underground storage. Mostly old radio equipment and technical systems, Rebecca explained, steering her daughter toward the house rather than the bunker. Important historical technology, but probably not as exciting as what you're imagining. Margaret met them at the door with after-school snacks prepared, providing welcome normality amidst the extraordinary circumstances. While Emily tackled her homework, Rebecca updated her mother on the day's developments. Active all this time, Margaret marveled, glancing toward the kitchen window where the government operation remained visible in the distance. Your father walked over that spot thousands of times, never knowing what was happening right under his feet. I keep wondering if Grandpa Edwin knew more than he let on, Rebecca mused. The easement agreement only specified government communications infrastructure, but Kendrick seems to think he would have had broader awareness given his military background. Your grandfather was excellent at keeping confidences, Margaret acknowledged. There were aspects of his service he never discussed, even with your father. If he knew the full scope of what was built here, he would have considered that information classified and treated it accordingly. This perspective aligned with Rebecca's growing understanding of her grandfather, a man who had balanced farming with national service in ways she was only now beginning to appreciate. The hidden facility represented a tangible connection to this aspect of her family history, a physical manifestation of Edwin Hayes's commitment to duties beyond the visible work of agriculture. Through the window, Rebecca noticed increased activity around the bunker entrance. More equipment was being brought to the surface, each component carefully secured in specialized transport containers. Colonel Harrington stood directing the operation, his posture suggesting heightened attention to particular items now being removed. I should get back out there, Rebecca decided. Whatever they're extracting now seems significant. When she returned to the command center, the atmosphere had noticeably intensified. Technical specialists worked with increased precision on what appeared to be a central component of the Sentinel system, a cylindrical unit approximately the size of a small filing cabinet encased in specialized shielding. What is that? She asked Dr. Farber, who was supervising the extraction process with particular attention. The primary data core, Farber explained, her professional demeanor temporarily superseded by evident enthusiasm. It contains the operational records of the facility, as well as the baseline programming for the entire Sentinel system. Essentially, it's the brain that controlled everything else. Rebecca watched as the technicians handled the unit with extraordinary care, using specialized equipment to maintain its power supply during transition to an external source. You're keeping it powered? She asked, noting the careful connection procedures. Necessary precaution, Harrington interjected, joining their conversation. The data architecture utilized volatile storage components that could lose information if power is completely removed. Standard procedure for recovery of this type of system. Kendrick, who had been observing silently from the edge of the command center, offered additional context. The Sentinel cores were designed with multiple redundancies to preserve operational data through almost any scenario. That unit likely contains a complete record of system activities since installation, potentially invaluable for understanding long-term performance of the technology. The carefully neutral phrasing didn't mask the significance. If the system had indeed remained active in some capacity for 30 years after official decommissioning, its data records could reveal much about actual government priorities versus public positions during that period. Harrington's slight frown suggested he recognized this implication. The data will be thoroughly analyzed by appropriate authorities as part of our standard historical preservation process, he stated, the formal language creating deliberate distance from Kendrick's more direct assessment. As the core unit was finally secured for transport, Attorney Weiss approached Rebecca with subtle urgency. "I need a moment of your time," she requested, guiding Rebecca to a private corner of the command center. "What's happening?" Rebecca asked, noting the lawyer's concerned expression. "They're cataloging equipment beyond what was initially disclosed in our agreement," Weiss explained in hushed tones. The core data unit wasn't specifically mentioned, nor were several of the specialized components they've extracted. This presents an opportunity to revisit compensation terms based on the expanded scope of recovery. Rebecca considered this legal perspective against the broader context of what they were witnessing. A recovery operation clearly more significant than initially presented. "You think they lowballed the value of what's down there?" "Not necessarily intentionally," Weiss clarified. "But the evidence suggests they either underestimated what remained intact or deliberately minimized its significance during initial negotiations. Either way, it provides solid grounds for supplemental compensation discussions." Before Rebecca could respond, a technician's voice over the communication system drew everyone's attention back to the main monitors. "Colonel, we've located an additional secured compartment behind the primary equipment rack. Hidden storage, sir, not indicated in the facility blueprints." The command center fell silent as the camera focused on what appeared to be a concealed panel in the wall of the secured room. Unlike the military standard equipment surrounding it, this addition showed signs of custom modification. Skilled, but definitely not part of the original facility design. "Unauthorized modification to a classified facility," Harrington muttered, his professional demeanor momentarily slipping to reveal genuine surprise. He leaned toward the communication system. "Approach with caution. Full documentation before attempting access." The technical team moved with heightened care, scanning the hidden compartment for potential security measures before proceeding. Their specialized equipment revealed no electronic triggers or booby traps, suggesting a straightforward mechanical concealment rather than active protection. "It appears to be a simple hidden storage area, sir," reported the lead technician. "Manually operated release mechanism. No signs of tampering or recent access. Proceed with opening," Harrington instructed, his attention entirely focused on the unexpected discovery. Rebecca watched the monitors intently as the technicians located and triggered the release mechanism, causing the panel to slide smoothly. Aside, despite decades without use, the camera peered into the revealed space, showing a metal case approximately 2 feet square, secured with a combination lock rather than military-grade security systems. "Civilian storage container," observed one of the technical specialists. "Not government issue," Harrington's expression tightened further. "Document fully before removal. I want every detail recorded before that case leaves the facility. The atmosphere in the command center had shifted dramatically. The methodical recovery operation now charged with the uncertainty of unexpected discovery. Rebecca noticed subtle changes in the officials' behavior. Harrington conferring urgently with security personnel, Dr. Farber examining historical documentation with renewed intensity, technical specialists handling the mysterious case with heightened protocols. They're rattled, Kendrick commented quietly, moving to stand beside Rebecca. That compartment wasn't in the official blueprints, which means it was added after construction, possibly without authorization. By whom? Rebecca asked, watching the careful extraction of the metal case from its hiding place. Most likely maintenance personnel with regular access to the facility, Kendrick speculated. During active operations, Sentinel nodes were visited quarterly by technical teams for systems checks and updates. Same individuals generally serviced. Specific facilities for continuity and security reasons. This assessment aligned with the maintenance logs Rebecca had discovered during their initial exploration, regular entries by the same few names over years of operation. So, someone with legitimate access created a hiding place within an already secret facility. A secret within a secret. Precisely, Kendrick confirmed, and judging by the design, they expected to retrieve whatever's in that case eventually. It wasn't abandoned or forgotten. It was deliberately preserved in a location they could access when needed. The case was carefully removed from its hiding place and transported to a specialized workstation within the bunker, where additional cameras provided detailed views of the examination process. The combination lock presented a challenge. Attempting to force it might damage the contents, while leaving it secured prevented inventory of what might be classified materials. Options for non-destructive access? Harrington asked the technical team. We could attempt common combinations first, suggested the lead specialist. Birth dates, service numbers, or facility codes associated with personnel assigned here. Maintenance records might provide relevant numbers. Do it, Harrington ordered. I want to know what's in that case before it leaves the facility. While the technical team worked through potential combinations, Attorney Weiss quietly guided Rebecca toward the exit of the command center. This discovery changes the dynamic significantly, she murmured once they were outside. Whatever's in that case wasn't included in our access agreement because they didn't know it existed. That gives us considerable leverage in negotiating supplemental terms. Rebecca considered this legal perspective while watching the continued activity around the bunker entrance. They're treating it like it might contain something dangerous or highly classified. Or potentially embarrassing, Weiss added. Unauthorized. Storage within a classified facility suggests someone was hiding something from their own chain of command. That creates interesting questions about ownership and authority. Before they could discuss further, one of Harrington's aides approached. With formal politeness. Ms. Hayes, Colonel Harrington requests your presence in the command center. They've accessed the case. Inside, the monitors displayed the now open metal container, its contents carefully arranged on an examination surface. Instead of weapons, classified documents, or sophisticated technology, the case contained personal items. Photographs, journals, letters in faded envelopes, and what appeared to be family memorabilia. These appear to be personal effects, reported the technician examining them. No classified materials immediately evident. Journals, correspondence, photographs dating from the late 1950s through mid-1980s. As the camera focused on the items, Rebecca felt a sudden jolt of recognition. One of the photographs showed a younger version of her grandfather, Edwin Hayes, in military uniform, standing beside several other men in front of what appeared to be a communications facility. Not the bunker beneath her farm, but clearly similar in purpose. "That's my grandfather," she said, stepping closer to the monitor. "Edwin Hayes." Harrington and Dr. Farber exchanged glances that combined surprise with dawning understanding. "Ms. Hayes, was your grandfather assigned to Project Sentinel in an official capacity?" Farber asked carefully. "Not that I'm aware of," Rebecca replied, equally surprised by the discovery. "He served in communications during the Korean War before purchasing this farm. I knew he had an easement agreement allowing the government to build something on the property, but nothing about direct involvement with the facility itself." Kendrick studied the photograph with greater intensity. "Technical operations team," he observed, noting insignia visible on the uniforms. They weren't just building sites on his land. Hayes was part of the team implementing the Sentinel network. He glanced at Harrington. "That explains the facility's designation as a continuity node. They placed it under Hayes specifically, because he had the technical background to maintain it if primary personnel were unavailable." The revelation created a momentary silence in the command center as everyone processed its implications. Rebecca stared at the photograph, seeing her grandfather in an entirely new context, not just a farmer who had allowed government access to his property, but a skilled technician who had helped implement a nationwide emergency communications system while maintaining the cover of ordinary agricultural life. "There's something else," reported the technician, examining the contents. "Personal journals, extensive entries regarding facility operations beyond the official logs, and technical documentation not included in the standard Sentinel manuals." Harrington moved quickly to the communication system. "Secure those documents immediately. Full containment protocols." He turned to Rebecca, his expression now carefully controlled. "Ms. Hayes, this discovery significantly alters our understanding of this facility's status. Your grandfather appears to have maintained personal records and technical documentation outside official channels, potentially classified information that falls under national security restrictions." Attorney Weiss stepped forward immediately. "Colonel, while national security concerns are valid, these items were clearly preserved by Ms. Hayes's grandfather on private property. Their status requires careful legal consideration before any removal from the premises." The tension in the command center escalated as security personnel moved to secure the discovered materials while legal boundaries remained unclear. Rebecca found herself in the unexpected position of potentially claiming ownership of items her grandfather had deliberately hidden within a government facility. Items that might contain classified information but also represented a personal family legacy. Dr. Farber approached with diplomatic caution. "Ms. Hayes, this is an unusual situation for everyone involved. While we need to assess these materials for security implications, we also recognize their potential personal significance to your family. Perhaps we can establish a cooperative approach that addresses both concerns." Rebecca glanced at Weiss, who gave a subtle nod, encouraging consideration of compromise rather than immediate confrontation. "What kind of cooperative approach?" Rebecca asked. "Joint examination," Farber suggested. "Our technical specialists would review the materials for classified content that genuinely requires protection, while you would be present throughout the process to ensure family documents and memorabilia are properly identified and preserved. Nothing would be permanently removed without mutual agreement on its status. The proposal represented a reasonable middle ground, acknowledging both security requirements and personal rights. Rebecca looked to Kendrick, whose experience might provide insight into whether this offer was standard procedure or unusual accommodation. "It's a fair approach," he confirmed quietly. "More transparent than typical classified recovery operations. The fact that they're offering rather than demanding suggests they recognize the complexity of jurisdiction in this case." With Weiss's legal guidance and Kendrick's security expertise both supporting the compromise, Rebecca agreed to the joint examination process. The discovered materials were carefully transferred to a secure workspace established in one of the government vehicles, where Rebecca would be permitted to observe the initial assessment. As preparations were made for this examination, Rebecca stepped outside for a moment of privacy to process the unexpected discovery about her grandfather. The autumn afternoon was beginning to fade, long shadows stretching across the farmland. As the sun descended toward the western horizon, the familiar landscape, fields her family had worked for generations, now held layers of meaning beyond agriculture. Dale approached from where he'd been observing the ongoing operation, his expression reflecting concern for his neighbor. "You all right? Looks like they found something significant in there." "Personal items belonging to my grandfather," Rebecca explained, still reconciling this new information with the man she had known. Journals, photographs, technical documents he kept hidden inside the facility. Apparently, he wasn't just allowing the government to build on his land, he was actively involved in the project itself. Dale's eyebrows rose in surprise. Edwin Hayes, secret government technician, while running a working farm, that's quite a double life. "Double life is right," Rebecca agreed, gazing toward the bunker entrance where teams continued their careful extraction work. "Makes me wonder how much of who he was remained hidden from our family. How many other secrets he kept while growing corn and raising my father." "Different generation," Dale observed thoughtfully. "Those men who served in Korea and lived through the early Cold War, they understood secrecy as patriotic duty. Compartmentalization wasn't just a security protocol, it was a way of life." This perspective helped Rebecca frame her grandfather's choices within their historical context. Edwin Hayes had come of age in an era when global conflict had twice threatened civilization, followed by the looming specter of nuclear annihilation. His generation had approached national security with a seriousness born of witnessing humanity's capacity for destruction firsthand. Ms. Hayes, one of Harrington's aides, approached with professional courtesy. "They're ready to begin the examination of the recovered materials, if you'd like to be present." Inside the specialized vehicle, a workspace had been established with proper lighting and document handling equipment. The contents of the metal case were arranged carefully on a conservation-appropriate surface, with digital cameras positioned to record the examination process. Dr. Farber supervised the procedure personally, with a security specialist and document expert completing the team. "We'll proceed systematically," Farber explained as Rebecca took her seat at the examination table. "Each item will be photographed in place before handling. Documents will be reviewed page by page for classified content, before determination of status." The process began with the photographs. Several dozen images documenting what appeared to be Edwin Hayes's involvement with Project Sentinel from its early implementation through various stages of development. Most showed technical teams at different facilities, with Edwin appearing in many alongside other specialists whose names were sometimes noted on the backs of the images. Your grandfather appears to have been part of the original implementation team, Farber observed, studying the chronological progression. These span nearly 15 years of active involvement, considerably longer than typical assignment rotation for such projects. Next came personal correspondence, letters between Edwin and various project colleagues discussing technical challenges, system improvements, and occasionally the broader purpose of their work. The language was careful, avoiding specific classified details while still conveying the seriousness of their mission during the height of Cold War tensions. The most revealing items, however, were the journals, 5 leather-bound volumes containing Edwin Hayes's detailed observations about the Sentinel system, his role in maintaining it, and his reflections on balancing this secret responsibility with his public identity as an Iowa farmer. "I have divided my life into separate domains," read one entry from 1962, "with distinct boundaries between them. When I work the fields under open sky, I am fully present in that role, noting soil conditions, weather patterns, crop development. When I descend beneath those same fields to maintain the systems below, I become equally absorbed in that separate reality of circuits, transmission protocols, and contingency scenarios. The psychological discipline required is considerable, but necessary." Another entry from 1968 revealed the personal weight of his classified responsibilities. "Margaret asked again today why I disappear into the workshop for hours during critical planting season. The cover story about radio repair work grows thin, yet I cannot share the true nature of my absences. This ongoing deception within my family is the heaviest burden of my service, perhaps heavier than the knowledge of what our systems are designed to withstand and what their activation would signify for our civilization." Rebecca found herself deeply moved by these glimpses into her grandfather's inner thoughts, his commitment to duty alongside his struggle with the secrets he kept from those closest to him. The journals revealed a man of greater complexity than family stories had preserved, someone navigating profound ethical territory while maintaining the outward appearance of straightforward rural life. The security specialist, however, was focusing on different aspects of the journals, technical details that occasionally appeared among the personal reflections. Some of these entries contain information about Sentinel capabilities that was highly classified, he noted, marking particular pages for further review. System vulnerabilities, communication protocols, authentication procedures, operational details that would still be considered sensitive. Dr. Farber nodded in agreement. The technical documentation is particularly concerning from a security perspective. These appear to be Mr. Hayes's personal engineering notes, including modifications and improvements he implemented that weren't fully documented in the official system records. As the examination continued, it became increasingly clear that Edwin Hayes had maintained an extensive personal archive of his classified work, partly as professional documentation, partly as a private record of a significant life experience he couldn't openly acknowledge. The material represented both legitimate security concerns and irreplaceable family history. "We have a complicated situation," Farber acknowledged after several hours of careful review. Approximately 30% of this material contains genuinely sensitive information that falls under continuing classification guidelines. The remainder consists of personal reflections and historical documentation of primarily private rather than security significance. Harrington, who had joined them toward the end of the examination, frowned at this assessment. Standard protocol would require securing all materials until they can be thoroughly reviewed by classification authorities. The commingling of personal and classified content creates procedural challenges. Rebecca felt a mounting determination to preserve this unexpected connection to her grandfather. These journals and photographs are part of my family's history. I understand security concerns about technical details, but I'm not willing to surrender my grandfather's personal reflections and photographs to disappear into some government archive. Weiss intervened with professional precision. Perhaps we could discuss a compromise approach that addresses legitimate security requirements while respecting Ms. Hayes's family connection to these materials. Digital copies with sensitive technical information redacted might provide a reasonable solution. After considerable discussion and consultation with higher authorities via secure communication, a compromise was indeed reached. The government would retain the original documents for thorough security review, but Rebecca would receive complete digital copies with only specifically classified technical details redacted. Additionally, all photographs and purely personal correspondence would be returned to her once documented. The process would be completed within 30 days, with Attorney Weiss permitted to review the redactions for appropriateness. As evening approached, the day's discoveries had transformed Rebecca's understanding of both her family history and the significance of the facility beneath her farm. What had begun as an unexpected complication to her agricultural operations had become a profound connection to her grandfather's secret life and his role in a critical national security infrastructure. Walking back toward the farmhouse as darkness fell, Rebecca found herself contemplating this dual legacy, the visible agricultural heritage that had supported her family for generations, and the hidden technical contribution that had quietly helped shield the nation during its most tense Cold War years. Dale and Kendrick joined her as she reached the porch, both men clearly curious about what the examination had revealed. My grandfather was essentially living a double life, Rebecca explained, still processing the revelation herself. Farmer on the surface, secret government technical specialist underneath. The journals show he was actively maintaining and even improving the Sentinel systems while running this farm for decades. Not an easy balance to maintain, Kendrick observed with professional understanding, particularly during that era when the work carried such high stakes. Dale nodded thoughtfully. Makes you wonder how many other ordinary-seeming folks were carrying similar responsibilities during those years. How many small towns had their own Edwin Hayes quietly doing their part while living seemingly normal lives? The observation highlighted the broader historical context of her discovery, not just a personal family revelation, but a glimpse into a largely unacknowledged aspect of Cold War history. Countless Americans had served in classified capacities, their contributions known only to small circles of colleagues similarly bound by secrecy. Her grandfather's hidden archive represented a rare window into that shadow world of ordinary citizens performing extraordinary service without recognition. As they stood in the gathering darkness, the lights from the government operation in the Eastfield created an island of activity against the rural night. The recovery work would continue into the following day, gradually emptying the underground facility of its classified technology while leaving its concrete shell intact beneath Rebecca's farmland. A physical reminder of both national history and family legacy. Emily appeared at the screen door, her expression curious about the extended conversations taking place outside. "Mom? Grandma says dinner's ready. Are your friends staying to eat?" The simple question bridged the extraordinary and ordinary aspects of the day, government secrets and classified technology alongside evening meals and family routines. Rebecca found herself smiling at this juxtaposition, appreciating how life continued its fundamental rhythms even amid remarkable discoveries. "I'm not sure," she replied, glancing questioningly at Dale and Kendrick. "Are you gentlemen hungry for some of my mother's famous meatloaf?" As darkness settled fully over the Hayes farm, Rebecca stood on her porch, watching the distant lights of the government operation gradually shut down for the night. The bunker beneath her soybeans had forever changed her understanding of her family's legacy, not just as Iowa farmers, but as quiet guardians of national security. 2 weeks later, the government operation had concluded, the classified components removed, and a modest ceremony held where military officials presented Rebecca with a special commendation honoring her grandfather's previously unacknowledged service. The compensation agreement had been substantially increased after the full scope of the facility's significance became clear, ensuring the Hayes farm would remain financially secure for generations. Most precious to Rebecca were the digitized journals, her grandfather's thoughts now preserved with only minimal redactions, and the photographs showing Edwin Hayes as she'd never known him, a technical specialist whose expertise had helped shield America during its darkest cold war hours. The bunker itself remained, its entrance now properly secured and registered as a historical site. Rebecca often found Emily sitting near it, writing stories about her great-grandfather's secret life, imagination blending with the remarkable truth. "Some heroes wear uniforms for all to see," Rebecca wrote in the farm's ledger that night. "Others wear coveralls, work the land by day, and serve their country in ways no one will ever know. My grandfather was both farmer and guardian, his legacy flourishing both above ground and below. What secrets lie beneath your family's history? What stories remain untold in the quiet corners of American farms, suburban neighborhoods, or small town main streets? The past is never as simple as it first appears. If this story of discovery resonates with you, hit that subscribe button and join us for more forgotten chapters of American history brought to light. Next week, we'll explore the mysterious disappearance of an entire lighthouse crew off the Maine coast in 1921, and the astonishing discovery made 80 years later that finally explained their fate. Until then, remember to look beyond the surface. Extraordinary stories often hide in the most ordinary places.